Well, President Bola Tinubu has restated his call for a permanent seat for Nigeria on the United Nations Security Council, saying that the global organization will recover its relevance only when it reflects the world as it is, not as it was. President Tinubu, in a speech during the ongoing general debate of the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly in New York, read on his behalf by Vice President Kashim Shettima, also called for sovereign debt relief as well as access to trade and financing. Nigeria's demand for a permanent seat at the UN Security Council has been a consistent feature of its foreign policy for decades, with successive administrations arguing that the current structure of the Council does not reflect present global realities, still largely shaped by the outcome of World War II.
To remind one, Nigeria must have a permanent seat at the UN Security Council. This should take place. This should take place as part of a wider process of institutional reform. 2, we need urgent action to promote sovereign debt relief and access to trade and financing. 3, countries that host minerals must benefit from those minerals. And 4th, the digital divide must close. As our friend the Secretary General has said, AI must stand for Africa included. On my first point, the United Nations will recover its relevance only when it reflects the world as it is, not as it was. Nigeria's journey tells this story with clarity. When the UN was founded, we were a colony of 20 million people. Absent from the tables where decisions about our fate were taken. Today, we are a sovereign nation of 236 million people, projected to be the third most populous country in the world. Sovereignty is a covenant of shared responsibility, a recognition that our survival is bound to the survival of others. To live up to this charge, we must work hand in hand with our neighbors and partners. We must follow the trails of weapons, of money, and of people. And for this, Nigeria's soldiers and civilians carry a proud legacy. They have participated in 51 out of 60 United Nations peacekeeping operations since our independence in 1960. We have stood with our partners in Africa to resolve conflicts, and we continue that commitment today through the Multinational Joint Task Force. We are despised by terrorists because we choose tolerance over tyranny. Their ambition is to divide us and to poison our humanity with a toxic rhetoric of hate. Please, I join you today to reassert Nigeria's commitment to peace, to development, to unity, to multilateralism, and to the defense of human rights is beyond compromise.
Right, the Vice President there, Shettima, representing his principal, Bola Tinubu, the president. And to examine further the speech of President Bola Tinubu delivered at the UNGA by the Vice President Kashim Shettima, joining me in the studio, Jidelfo Adibe, a professor of political science and international relations at Nasarawa State University, Kefi. He's also the founder of Adonis and Abe Publishers. Well, we were just discussing behind the scene, but like France, UK, Australia, Nigeria is calling for the recognition of a Palestinian state, criticizing the UN's handling of the ongoing human suffering in the Middle East and other regions. The VP Shettima calls it stain on our collective humanity. Give an overview of his speech at the UNGA. Let's start there.
Well, first of all, Vice President Shettima speaks very well. When he speaks, you remember Oshibanjo in terms of speech delivery.
Yeah.
So we give him credit in that. But the 4 points he marshaled, for example, he wants, first of all, he wants a permanent seat for Nigeria in the UN Security Council. This has been an ongoing. And then he talked one thing that's to reflect the realities. Yes, the 5 members of the security, permanent members, were the winners after the Second World War. So it reflected the balance of power at that time. Now you ask yourself, there have been various permutations from the time of Kofi Annan on how the UN Security Council could be reformed. One of the proposals that was very, very, people were Africans thought was going to go through was the one suggesting that Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa, could take Africa's slots. Now, if you come now to the relative positions of Africa, of Nigeria in Africa, has it become stronger or weaker? Let's start now with our GDPs. South Africa has not just overtaken us as largest economy in Africa. Its nominal GDP is like 410 billion. Now, followed by Egypt at 347 billion. We are not even third, followed by Algeria at 268, and we are 188, which means they've already like doubled, more than 2.5. Apart from economy, South Africa has also established its leadership credentials. It hosted the World Cup successfully in 2010. It hosted the summit, 15th summit of the BRICS in 2023. It is going to host the G20, is currently enjoying the presidency of the G20 and will host the summit in November. So in terms of political leadership, it has taken over. Now, one thing that happened at the 15th summit, where 6 countries were invited, 3 African countries, Egypt and Ethiopia, and that has geostrategic importance that can throw an insight into what could happen if they want Africa to be represented. South Africa is not only the most economically developed, it is also seen as the link between the black world and the white world. Now you move to Egypt. Egypt is the 3rd largest economy, regarded by many as the oldest civilization in Africa, and is the link between the Arab world and Africa. Now you go to Ethiopia. Ethiopia is the headquarters, the permanent headquarters of African Union. So you can see that thing at the time it just tells us that something has happened. So that is about permanent seat. It is nobody mentioning about our contributions to the UN. I'm just coming, Andy.
I want to lead you on.
Yeah.
I'll come back to the Palestinian question because that was where I started. Because I thought to give an overview.
Yeah.
You've dived into the reforms, the 4 reforms that the president talked about, and these reforms. Let me get them. He talked about. He referred to
sovereign debts.
Yeah, he talked about, I just want to make sure I get them. He mentioned 4 key reforms that's needed in the UN: the issue of permanent UN security seat, proliferation of weapons and nuclear disarmament. He also talked about Nigeria's population, the youngest. He talked about that, using that as a leverage.
Yes,
Then he talked about global financial system as it concerns debt crisis that Africa faces. So you can begin to
the 4 key things. One, if you are, I started by the first one he mentioned, where that was to give us a seat, and I saw it as you making a presentation as out of a sense of entitlement.
Oh,
and
really?
Yes, and all these things that Africa
based on what?
That's what he was saying. We have this African youth bulge. We are the largest population, and that we are contributing to the UN. Keep peacekeeping. But in international politics and relations, nobody respects you because of your past benevolence. What your respect commands is the aggregate of the leverages you can bring on the table at any point in time. So what are the leverages we have? Compared to this South Africa I mentioned, compared to Egypt compared to Ethiopia. Ethiopia is the fastest growing economy in Africa. So you have now to ask yourself, this is a time for us to. And it's actually very annoying to many people. China has China has 1.4 billion people. India has 1.4 billion. How many times have you seen Chinese leaders telling you about your population? Especially when most of your people are in multidimensional poverty. So your population doesn't necessarily equate to a big market. It can be a drain on resources if most of you are poor. I am not saying that. I think it's, for a speech like that, he did say a number of things that I believe were good, but also there are some things like entitlement. Take the second one here, about sovereign that is Paris debt forgiveness. That was what
he was alluding to.
Now, there's a contradiction in it. Those of people who are old enough, there was a group called Jubilee 2000. These were a group that were campaigning for debt relief, and that led in, I think, 1999 to the highly indebted poor countries initiative where 110 billion was forgiven. People like Susan George wrote a book called A Fate Worse Than Death. It became a global thing. Churches, civil society groups were campaigning for debt forgiveness. Do you know what happened? In the Western world, some people said it would be foolish to forgive these debts because they will soon go and amass another set of debts and come back to ask you to forgive them. Is it not what's happening now? Obasanjo led, brought down our debt. It's under Okonjo-Iweala, paid 12 billion. Our 30 billion debt was forgiven. You know, what happened? From the time of our current debt profile is about 190 trillion, roughly 97 billion dollars. So there's no point believing that the reason why you are accumulating debts is that tomorrow again you carry a begging bowl and say forgive us, and then you want to talk again big, you want them to treat you like with respect. You can't have a begging bowl on one hand and demanding demanding global respect on the other hand. And the same thing, I like what you talked about Gaza. And
yeah, I was going to come to that. You know, that was where I started. You know, let me just say what he said there before we branched into, I said, to give overview, and you started, so I entered into reforms. The president also advocated a two-state solution that we're discussing behind the scene as the most dignified path to lasting peace in the region. What do you make of the word, using the word, I want to understand why he used dignified path.
Yeah, dignified, I mean, for the Palestinians. There's nobody, you know, who is happy with the way Palestinians are treated, because it also reflects the balance of power, especially the big power.
In fact, he said, I'm not cutting you off, he said the people of Palestine are not collateral damage. They are human beings entitled to the same freedoms and dignities that the rest of us take for granted. Is this making any sense?
No, yeah, it does. But I would like also to balance it out. There have been things that have been frustrating the two-state solution. And the truth is that both sides, there are blames to go on both sides. The issue is that ordinary Palestinians are the ones suffering. I would have liked, like the Palestinian president mentioned, if he had mentioned about what happened in October.
He clearly said Hamas. He clearly said, he clearly...
No, I'm talking about VP's Shetima's speech.
Oh, VP, okay.
It wasn't there.
Okay.
You know, to mention some of the things that... Because essentially, when you went and killed 1,200, they knew the temperament in the state, that is tit for tat. So the issue, some strategies I've been thinking, was it a strategy to draw them into a war, believing that they are incapable of sustaining a prolonged war? It is condemnable, but the issue now is that there's a humanitarian tragedy in Gaza.
And then Israel is not allowing either reporting or humanitarian aid.
That is very condemnable. But I'm also saying that they need to tone down their rhetoric on both sides. If you go to the number of states...
But then again, Hamas, at a point, Hamas accepted the deal that was even brokered by U.S. Representative
I don't want
Witkoff.
to, seem like, because the counter-argument from Israel is that if they do so, they will regroup. You know, Israel had given itself this word.
Is that a reasonable counter-argument?
For example, the right of what we call preemptive strike. Because it's a small country, it gives itself what we call the right of preemptive strike, which means if it senses that you are developing a capability that can hurt it, that within 10 years, this capability you're developing might be able to hurt the country.
All right, let's take this further. Many countries in the global south have considered the UN body as increasingly unable to protect civilians or check impunity. How can UN change this narrative? Do you agree with it in the first place?
Yes, because the UN actually is, partly because of the Security Council. The UN General Assembly is more like a moral force. It has no enforcement capacity. If you really want where things are done, it's the UN Security Council. And then you have to be a veto wielding for anything to happen. There has to be a concurrent of opinion between or among the 5 veto wielding countries.
Isn't that the major challenge that the UN is facing, the question of veto?
Well, some people have argued it is. Others say, what is the point of removing the veto and taking a resolution that nobody can enforce? If you are a nuclear power, for example, if say Britain and say or US say I don't agree, and it has happened in some cases where you can take a decision, US say no, I don't agree. So who is going to enforce it? So that's the counter argument, that there's a need to get the consensus opinion of those with the might, so that any agreement, once there is a consensus once there's a consensus among them, then whatever is agreed upon is likely to be implemented.
But that's where another problem is, because that consensus, you don't see Putin agreeing, you don't see Trump agreeing, and you wonder how you're going to get the consensus.
They do get on some, but that's also probably one of the reasons why it has endured. If you look at the League of Nations before it, which did not have that kind of, it simply unraveled. By 1939, it was gone. So I'm not defending it. Everybody believes, and I passionately agree, that there's a need to democratize the UN Security Council.
Yeah.
My own interest is that Nigeria, if we want to really to be taken serious, we shouldn't be there. South Africa has overtaken out Egypt. We have been the things that made us one of the, even the sub-regions.
I wish we could extend, because I'm being told to extend, expand the discussion to begin to ask you, where did we get it wrong? How do we then get it right to overtake? Because before we were ahead of South Africa. In fact, we helped South Africa to get out of apartheid, right? And today they're bigger, as you're saying. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Before I let you go, what reforms would you want at the UN?
First, foreign policy flows from domestic policy. Get your home in order. Once you get your home in order, build a nation.
Charity begins at home, they say.
Once you get in, there's no need to run even around, say you are attracting foreign investment. Capital spells opportunity that will come looking for you.
Thank you so much, Professor Jidelfor Adibe, for being on The World, and your insights are quite appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.